So right now, there's been discourse over Biden reopening child migrant detention facilities, and it's made a lot of people really angry, and I think that's for good reason, because detaining child migrants is a bad thing, and we should be critical of it. But I noticed that a lot of the discourse surrounding that issue has been really misinformed, and unfortunately, this is another issue where I think leftists are actually harming their ability to advocate for good things through their own misunderstanding of the issue. So, or maybe not necessarily through their misunderstanding of the issue, more so through their unwillingness to confront it from a proper angle, which is why I'm glad that I didn't jump on the bandwagon immediately. So I want to make something really, really clear. It is bad that children are being kept in detention centers. Okay, that's a flat out, that's an easy one for me to come out with. Okay, that's my hard take right there. You know, cancel me if you will. It's a bad thing, but there is a lot of nuance, not behind whether or not it's bad. It's bad. There's a lot of nuance behind the political context behind what's going on, and I think that a further understanding of that context can help us better challenge the immigration framework we have in this country. Does that make sense? So I want to start with a little bit of history, and maybe you've heard all this before, and I'll be a little more realistic. Maybe you've thought you probably should learn about this before, but haven't because it's boring, and now you're here to learn from me with my traditional canter-wheeling storytelling style of explaining history. So maybe this will be the opportunity, okay? I want to say this, okay? Why do we have this border problem to begin with? Well, it's really complicated, and I can give a basic version, okay? America is one of the wealthiest countries per capita in the world. In terms of flat wealth, it is the wealthiest country in the world. And in spite of a lot of internal domestic issues and a lot of economic issues, the fact remains that America is a beacon of opportunity for people from poorer countries. That does not mean that they get treated well when they are here. That does not mean that America is perfect or enviable. It only means that there are worse places to live. I think we all know that. Or if you don't know that, then you need your perspective cleared. Mexico is a country with a very mixed history. And though some sources of media, some news outlets over-exaggerate this, it does remain the case that a good portion of the Mexican political infrastructure is controlled or at least influenced by the cartels. The cartels, the drug cartels in Mexico, are responsible for, I think, about 80% of the narcotics that arrive in America from a foreign source, which makes sense. We have like a 2,500 mile contiguous border, which is almost impossible to police, and the cartels have made billions of dollars from funneling drugs, guns, whatever, back into America, which is actually funny because the guns are made in America. So they go to Mexico and then they come back here from Mexico. It's a whole process. The cartels are enormously wealthy, and because they're wealthy, they have power in Mexico. They have the power to buy off judges and buy off police chiefs and buy off the federales when they have the opportunity to do so, and that makes it exceedingly difficult for the Mexican government to meaningfully fight back against the influence of the cartel, which is terrifying for people who live in Mexico. Oh, yes. Have you seen Breaking Bad? It's like real life. Breaking Bad. And south of Mexico, for a number of reasons that are too complicated to get into, there are many countries in Central and Southern America that also have severe internal issues, which cause migrancy, which cause people to flee the political circumstances of their nations. Many of these issues are caused directly by America. Many of these issues are a very direct product of our interference in their democracies and in their civil structures far into the past and recently. And even the Mexican drug cartels really only have the power that they do because they're able to make so much money off of us. I mean, think about it. If drugs were legal, I mean, if we had mass drug decriminalization, if we ended the war on drugs, if we made them all, treated it like a medical issue, that would mean that the sale of narcotics could be regulated and controlled, which means that you would get it from legal sources rather than illegal sources, much in the same way that the Decriminalization of marijuana has led to an increase in people buying from dispensaries and a decrease in people buying from dealers, which has led to a lot of dealers being pushed off the market. Likewise, cartels being the largest dealers, essentially, or distributors, they would be pushed out of economic viability, in part by a legalization of these products. And that's not even to speak of all the wonky CIA shit we've been doing south of the border. So that's the reason why we have this immigration issue. People have been coming up from the southern border for a long, long time, but in recent years, things have gone up fairly significantly. During the Bush years, he passed the first, well, I can't really say it's the first. It was actually, I believe, during the Clinton years. I think it was it was 1996. It was the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act and the Illegal Reform Immigrant Responsibility Act, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Acts. And essentially what these did was they increased the number of immigrants in detention near the southern border. Because the question of what to do with immigrants when they arrive is actually a really difficult one. I mean, think about it, okay? Think about it. We have a huge contiguous border. Now, we can't just let people in willy-nilly. I know, that's the dream long term. But right now, with our current civil structure, we can't just do that. So some kind of enforcement is necessary. So what do? Well, do we just turn them away? That's traditionally been the process. You turn them away, and then if they come back after being turned away, maybe you introduce harsher penalties because they keep trying. Do you detain them in the process of waiting for like a court date or a trial? Do you allow them to exist in the U.S. for a time and you just hold them on bail, or you just have like a sponsor who takes care of them and then they come to the courts later? And it's actually a really, really difficult system to fully parse out. And unfortunately, because of that massive contiguous border and the number of people trying to come up from our south, there will always be immigrant detention centers. I want to be clear about that. As long as our system exists as it does, immigrant detention centers are a fundamental component of the way our system has to function. Now, that's not to speak to the effectiveness of these systems. That's not to speak to how humane they are. I'll give you an example. There is a pretty huge difference, okay, between an immigrant detention center, which is large, well-staffed, well-heated, well-fed, with beds and sponsors, supervision, kept close to major American cities, which allows for journalists to more easily access its facilities to ensure that there is no abuse going on, and detention camps, kids in cages, like what we saw in the Trump administration. Now, that's not to say that the former is good. I don't like people being detained for any reason. But as long as the system exists as it does right now, there are ways to do it better, and there are ways to do it worse. Mandatory detention was authorized first by Bill Clinton. And after that, we had Bush. And Bush actually introduced further policies to increase their zero tolerance approach to immigration. Now, during the course of Bush's presidency, America was getting a lot of people coming up from Mexico. A lot of people. And it started to scale down after the Bush presidency. It was complicated reasons. But during that time, I think the number of people who were kept in detention facilities usually ranged day to day around 10,000, thereabouts. And maybe this will humanize the guy, though it probably shouldn't. Even though there was a zero tolerance policy for immigrants coming up from the southern border, usually exceptions were made for families. Keep that in mind. Under the Bush administration, generally speaking, if a family came up with a kid, they would say, okay, no detention facility, we'll find another way. That's nice. When Obama came to be president, there was an overhaul, or at least a proposed overhaul of the Immigration Detention Center. But unfortunately, by that point, the DHS and ICE had both fairly firmly cemented some degree of political autonomy when it came to how they operated the detention centers at the border. The president does not have direct control over what ICE does. At least it certainly seems that way based on the apparent disconnect between what ICE does and what its leaders tell it to do. I'll give you an example of that shortly. Obama is known as the deporter-in-chief. That number is colored a little bit by the fact that when we count deportations, we're also counting people turned away at the border, which is not necessarily, I don't know if that's necessarily a deportation, because they weren't a resident. There's a pretty big difference between a person being a resident in the United States for some time and then being caught by ICE and deported, and somebody being caught at the border and then turned away. There's a big difference between those things, but Obama was not especially good with regards to immigration issues. But even compared to what we have today, I mean, it was good by comparison. I think that the Obama administration actually kept separate detention facilities for women and children. And after a court order, it was determined that they should be released, I think after 28 days, that the men would be kept in separate facilities and they would have more stringent immigration procedures, but women and children would be kept in other ones and they would be allowed freedom faster, which does contribute, I think, a little bit to the right-wing narrative of male disposability, but whatever the case may be, it's a little better. In 2015, a memo was made public issuing guidelines to ICE personnel for how to appropriately care for transgender immigrants in sex-segregated housing that corresponded to their gender identity. So back in 2015, same year gay marriage went legal state-round, they were making, at least attempting to make, some accommodations for those provisions. I think a couple hundred trans women come up from the southern border every year, which really shouldn't be surprising with the number of people we have coming up. But it's, you know, it's interesting. I don't think a lot of people thought about that. Bet you ICE wouldn't have thought about that if there weren't for that memo. I don't even know if they took it seriously, to be perfectly honest. Anyway. Then we have the Trump administration. So now we hear about family separation. So this is the discourse that goes on every time people talk about immigration centers, okay? People will say Trump is detaining children in these cages. And then other people will say, actually, Obama built those cages, which in many cases is true. In fact, there was a viral photo of kids kept in cages. They were sleeping on the ground with those little metal blankets over them. That picture was taken in 2014, 2 years before the end of Obama's presidency. It's true that children were detained under Obama's presidency and that the conditions under which they were detained were in many cases detestable, though the treatment of these children would only worsen with time. And I guess we're about to get to that. Now, I want to make clear something about ICE, okay? Immigration, Customs Enforcement. Wait, right? Oh, God. I didn't fuck that up, did I? You know, I get so used to saying ICE. Yeah, Immigration, Customs Enforcement. Okay, yeah. I get so used to saying ICE, I think I actually forget the what it's meant to stand for. You know. The Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, was created after 9/11. It was created in 2003, and since then it has been the bulwark of our internal state policing. It has been the device through which we exert control over undesirables. I think that the Department of Homeland Security has actually been one of the foremost agencies working to promote human cruelty in America, possibly at this point more so than the CIA and the FBI, at least over the past 20 years. And ICE has been key in facilitating that promotion of human cruelty. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what ICE detention centers have been like, particularly under the Trump administration. ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, essentially has these camps. There are private camps as well near the border, which are owned by companies and then run by ICE, which is terrifying because these are essentially for-profit concentration camps. But whether they're being run or owned by ICE, there have been a litany of accusations, thrown at the organization regarding the treatment of those incarcerated. And I'm just going to list off a couple of them, okay? I want to lay it out a little bit. I want to put it on the table. So first and foremost, the easiest one to talk about is the fact that our treatment of asylum seekers violates international law. Asylum seekers are supposed to be given an opportunity to ride on into a country and declare their attempted asylum status at a port of entry or at an appropriate venue. But that appropriate venue is not an ICE detention center. They are not given that opportunity to declare their intent, which means that they are in violation of international law and treaties ratified by the United States, being denied fundamental rights they have. Often these ICE detention centers are understaffed, and there are not people who operate these facilities who speak Spanish. If you can believe that. I don't know how you get working an ICE detention center without speaking Spanish, but if you can't speak Spanish, if there's nobody in these facilities to translate for the people who come up there, how the fuck are you supposed to know what's going on? How do you know if they have a medical issue? How do you know if they're not in need of some immediate assistance or help? How do you know anything? There have been a massive range of allegations of sexual abuse. We had the hysterectomies that were, that there was a breakout story on those just, I think, like 6 months ago. Sexual abuse, not just of the adults, but of the children, too. There are stories of them not being provided proper and legal due process, access to legal counsel. There are stories of them being denied appropriate accommodations, food, sleeping on the ground, nothing but these metal blankets that they put over. And hey, let me tell you, it gets cold at the border. It gets hot and it gets cold. Not many mountains are forests to trap in air, which means that in the nighttime, some of these people can see their breath as they're trapped on the ground, on the dirt, underneath these metal blankets. You know what I'm talking about, right? They have these reflective, they're like hikers use them. You know what I mean? I mean, Mylar blankets. Thank you. That's what they're called. They are better for keeping you warm than traditional comfy cotton blankets, but ain't enough. This is only to speak of the beginning with all the sexual, physical allegations. There's also the ongoing use of solitary confinement against immigrants that have been confined here, which is a form of torture where you lock a person in a solitary cell for days and days and days, and does horrible things to your psyche. Some of these people are kept in for more than 2 weeks, which, let me tell you, you ADHD-ridden millennials, Gen Z types, whew, you'd be thinking suicide pacts after 2 minutes, okay? 2 weeks? Fuck that. Fuck that. It's torture. We do it. Yeah, it violates the Geneva Convention. Do it anyway. And let me be perfectly clear, okay? Why do they do that? That's a great question. Because the people who work at ICE hate the people whose job it is to look over. I want to be really clear about that, okay? I'm sorry, it's a temptation, the sociological imagination, for us to, like, justify this, but in reality, the people at ICE seem to be taught that the people coming up from the border are parasites that need to be kept out to keep our country pure and clean, and that any treatment of them whatsoever is justified insofar as it facilitates our national security. That's the attitude that we've taken towards issues like this for a long time. We did it with the Japanese detention centers back on the West Coast during World War II. We did it with people at Gitmo. We do this all the time. We did it in Iraq. We did it. This happens all the time. It happens with our soldiers. It happens with our police. And it happens with our border officials. So Donald Trump comes into office, and Donald Trump takes his hard stance on immigration, and he instigates, or he puts forward, a no-tolerance immigration policy that now gives ICE the legal authority to separate children from their families. This took place, there's a memo that came out in 2018, I think. I think it came out in 2018. And the detention of children at these immigration facilities skyrocketed. Because previously to this point, the children that were detained were children that came up unaccompanied. And I have to say, it's a difficult problem. What do you do when a child comes up unaccompanied from the southern border? That's a pretty tough one, right? Like, fuck. We can't just, like, turn them away. we have to, there has to be some kind of way of managing their needs. But prior to that point, we were a little bit more lenient. Now, the Trump administration just started separating families, you know? And pushing harsher sentences and prosecutory tactics on the families that they came with. And thousands of kids were separated from their families. They were kept in separate child immigrant detention facilities, and they were subjected to all of the abuses that I just listed. Now, what's interesting is that even though the memo for this treatment was only made public, I think, in 2018, it turns out that ICE had actually been acting on these orders since late 2017, meaning that there was a period of nearly a year during which our border officials were illegally separating children from families without any sort of media or journalistic supervision. It's terrifying. I mean, the government essentially promoting a policy like that, just quiet, you know, just shh. You don't even find out until a while later, until it has to be made public. And of course, with the family separation, you had all these stories, you know, the abuse of children, sexual, physical, or otherwise, the torture procedures, the forced hysterectomies, what have you. Actually, after the family separation was sort of prohibited, the Trump administration made some token effort at attempting to reunite these kids with their families. But it turns out they actually didn't have a plan for that. They never actually took hold of the records necessary to find out who these kids belonged to. And I want to be clear on that. Not only did these kids get separated from their families, they didn't even bother to, write down contact information. They didn't, I mean, to the extent you can, they didn't exactly bring cell phones, or at least not all of them, but they didn't even have plans for reuniting these families. And it turns out that due to poor documentation from ICE, not only were they separating thousands of kids with no attempt or intention of bringing them back together, but because of these poor record keepings, there were thousands more kids that had been separated than were ever recorded. There was essentially like a black hole in the records, just this void where children just disappeared into. And that facilitated a lot of the abuse they experienced because they essentially became unpersons. The Mexican government isn't coming up north to chase after these migrants, and there aren't effectively any systems by which their presence and health can be monitored in America. They're completely unaccountable, which facilitate a lot of what happened after that. Yeah, many of them aren't even Mexican. A lot of them are South American. And fucking people in South America, their governments aren't going to come up here and collect people. I mean, we didn't have a system for it. ICE didn't build a system for it. And we kept building out these child detention centers over and over. Definitely where Epstein got kids from. Oh, maybe. I don't know. Now, I think Epstein, didn't he have to stop doing his shit a while back after his first arrest? I don't actually know any of the details of Epstein's fucking adventures. So that's all bad. It's really, really bad. I mean, it's extraordinarily bad. It's indefensibly bad. And now we have Biden's administration. And Biden's administration has committed to reforming our system for dealing with migrants and what have you. And this is where we get to the kids in cages narrative. So, oh wait, hold on. We're getting a Vice News article. ICE detention center captain was on a neo-Nazi website and wanted to start a white nationalist group. Damn, dude, that's crazy. Who would have guessed that relationship? So, you've probably heard that Biden has been reopening child detention facilities that were previously closed and that children are being put there. Now, I want to be perfectly clear again, because I know that I'm going to get clip-chimped by leftists. I want to make it perfectly clear that any system which facilitates the imprisonment of children is morally reprehensible. However, let's know what we're criticizing, okay? Do you guys know why Biden opened these facilities? I'm serious. Do you actually know? Get the Pepe posting out of the way, but then I actually want to see if any of you guys know. I didn't think so. There were two reasons. First of all, COVID regulations, which are now being followed better than they were under the Trump administration, have decreased the number of people that can be housed at previously existing ICE facilities. You can't cram everyone into a box, COVID, so on and so forth. And adhering to those requirements reduces the occupational capacity of these pre-existing facilities. And second, since Biden took office, there has been an increase in immigrants, many of whom are children. That's not conjecture. There's actually been a marked increase. There are more children who are coming up. There's been more migrants in general, actually. The reason for that is because there's probably a perceived belief that Biden will be less harsh on immigrants, which is probably true. And there's also, again, the conditions that lead to this are really complicated. But the gist of it is that more kids are arriving from the border. The reason these new camps were opened is because under the current administration guidelines for dealing with migrants, even the guidelines that they had back from the Obama era. When do you think we're going to start referring to Obama's two presidential terms as like the first Biden era, you know, eventually? Anarcho-Bidenist regime moving back and forward through time. The reason they reopened these facilities is because they needed to find a place to put these kids, and the facilities they had simply could not accommodate more without them violating COVID restrictions. So that sounds like a defense of these facilities. It's about to be a criticism. We're going to get to that. The other thing that I want to say, just so you guys know what you're talking about, is that there is a world of difference between these facilities at the camps that people were being kept at previously. I cannot stress that enough. Here are some photos from inside of these opened facilities. So we have these like large classrooms with 6 feet apart. All the seats are kept. We have like educational materials in classrooms and recreation areas. It's in terms, they're beds too, like actual, do they have that in here? Yeah, they're actually like beds, you know, not like cages with blankets. So again, this isn't a defense. It's still a camp and a violation of what I consider to be the right to free movement. But isn't that one actually an HHS facility? Yeah, that's what they're opening right now. Dude, Vosh, this propaganda. I really do hate you people. I hope you know that. You actually don't want nuanced understanding of any of these issues, do you? You just want to go on Twitter and scream. You can go on Twitter and scream if you want to, but for God's sake, can you understand these issues well enough to scream about them appropriately? Fuck. Why is that wrong for people? Like, people think that a nuanced understanding of any... by the way, just want to say, if you read Marx, you would actually find that a lot of what he says in there, if said today, would come off as a defense of capitalism. Unironically. A lot of what Marx said about capitalism is how it is a necessary component of historical material progression, and how the existence of capitalism has facilitated the development of industries which will be necessary for the formation of socialism. So, and I imagine like people reading that today, they'd be like soy-facing right now. They'd be like, I thought Marx was a communist. But, you know, come on, let's try to be a little bit better. Let's try to be a little better. Now, I want to make it clear that these detention centers, while detention centers, this is nothing more than a gilded cage. Can we be clear about that? This is a gilded cage, okay? Putting classroom desks and beds inside of a detention center does not a not detention center make. However, I'm going to be real with you guys. If I had to choose between migrant kids being kept at some abuse-laden ICE facilities where they'll be packed into cages and forced to sleep in the cold dirt every night, or them being kept in what seems to be like more of a communal facility with a lot more like journalistic oversight, I would prefer the latter anytime. And if you're unable to differentiate between those two, I wonder about how much you actually care for these kids. Like, I actually have to wonder. Now, everything that I've talked about so far with regards to Biden's camps feels like a defense of what he's doing. But it's not. I'm going to read for you an AOC tweet. We like AOC here, don't we? We're fans of the AOC tweet. Yeah, we're good. You know what I like? So everyone knows the first tweet from AOC's tweet chain here, but nobody seems to remember the third one. And that's how we're going to move into the final section here. Solutions. This is not okay, never has been okay, never will be okay, no matter the administration or party. Based. Our immigration system is built on a carceral framework. It's no accident that challenging how we approach these issues are considered controversial stances. They require reimagining our relationship to each other and challenging common assumptions we take for granted. Now, here's a really important third point. It's only 2 months into this administration, and our fraught, unjust immigration system will not transform in that time. That's why bold reimagination is so important. DHS shouldn't exist, agencies should be reorganized, ICE gotta go, ban for-profit detention, create climate refugee status, and more. Nobody remembers the third tweet here. AOC is not saying that Biden is in the wrong for not fixing this problem. AOC is saying that the current solution we have is unacceptable. And that's the position that I hold. And she's right. Our immigration system has been carceral for an extremely long time. Some people, they don't even seem to understand that there are alternatives to that system. They don't even think of any difference. And I'll admit, it is a complicated problem. Hundreds of thousands of people come up from the border. And again, and I want to be clear, I would love to live in an open border society. But right now, well, it's not viable. So we can't just let them all in with absolutely no supervision or oversight. I mean, fuck, even if we did have open borders, we would still want people to get SSNs. I mean, we would still have a system for intake, you know? There would still be something. Why exactly is it not viable? Am I missing something, Vosh? The way the world works right now just doesn't allow for open borders. What you would need before you could implement them is greater parity economically and socially between countries of the world. You would need better institutions to facilitate the movement of people from one area to another. Really? Yeah, really. Holy fuck, 14-year-olds. Do you unironically think that we could just do open... If we just did open borders, do you know what would happen? People would flood into this country by like multiple millions every year, and it would cause damage to our economy because we don't have the institutions capable of facilitating that. And it would make our country worse, and we would be a laughingstock to the rest of the world because dumb fuck lefties actually directed econ policy without thinking about any of the shit they were saying. Okay? Stop. Holy fuck. Okay? Jesus Christ. Think for a little bit. Think about what that might do to our system to just allow everyone in. Okay? That's the long-term goal. That's the long-term goal. Not now. Jesus. You can make a system better without jumping to the fucking post-state communist utopian solution. Now, what are other solutions to this? Okay? Well, I think first and foremost, we need to talk about child detention because this is infinitely more pressing an issue than what's going on right now at the border with adults. If you're an adult and you move across the border, you have, at the very least, you have the maturity to fully recognize the risk you're taking and engage with the world you're moving into, bad as it may be. But that's not the case with children. It used to be the case that if children came up, provisions were made to allow their quick release. But release to where? Well, here are some potential solutions for the issues that we're having right now with children coming up from the border. First and foremost, detention is unacceptable. Maybe like for a day to like process, but beyond that, no. Like get some numbers down, you know? But beyond that, like long-term detention, even short-term detention is just unacceptable. What I would like to see is a sponsorship system, okay? Think of it this way, okay? Imagine if in border towns we had houses and apartments and we had facilities that were owned by the government and we had sponsors who worked there. And when children come up from the border, rather than them being kept in a camp, they're essentially allowed like a sort of pseudo-guardianship under this sponsor that would allow the sponsor to do stuff like manage court appointments, manage medical needs, anything like that. They would have quick and easy access not only to the government through these facilities, but also to the rest of the city. Because I don't want to... These people shouldn't be kept separate. Right now, what we're doing and what the Biden administration is attempting to facilitate is a kind of adoption system where these kids are kept until somebody adopts them or until they can be reunited with their parents. But who knows how long that process can take? I think that a system where you decentralize a little bit while still having a top-down approach for managing the intake of child migrants would be infinitely preferable. Now, again, these are unaccompanied children. If we're talking accompanied children, if we're talking children that are with families, we should go back to the Bush era, procedure. Why do we detain these people at all? I need to be perfectly clear, okay? There is this myth amongst conservatives that children are being falsely claimed as children by sex runners or cartel members to provide a narrative that there's no harm that can be done by that family. Like, the idea is you have a cartel guy, like an MS-13 dude, and he hooks up with his lady, okay? And then they find some poor urchin off the street, take them in, and then they move up north, they cross the border, so that if they get caught, they can say, oh no, I'm just a family. Oh no, we're just a cool family. We're just chill. We're just a cool family. There really doesn't seem to be any evidence of that happening. Like, at all. There really just doesn't seem to be any evidence of that happening. It's a narrative. It's a movie narrative. Maybe it could happen like in a movie. I'm sure it's happened at some point in life. But I think, I'm just guessing. I imagine that cartel members probably have easier ways of getting into the country. I'm just guessing here. Like, aren't cartels multi-billion-dollar industries that have ties to the government in Mexico? Couldn't they just drive up here through legal means? Couldn't they? Yeah. Like, not just to speak of tunnels and planes, but like, they can just come into the country. Like, yeah, they can just come in. They can just get visas. Why wouldn't they? What? They're wealthy. They're powerful. What, you think that, like, the way cartels exert influence in this country is through, like, hoping that ICE is nice to them when they fucking run? No. Maybe some of them. But I sincerely doubt this is the primary means by which they come in here. They have the wealth to come in here if they want. Jesus. Yeah, cartels are the ones who manage the coyote system in part, don't they? I mean, at least they have a hand in it. And a lot of these systems, I mean, they rely on, like, people on the inside. They rely on a familiarity and understanding of the means by which people can come into the country. A lot of these people can just come in legally. And then, if you, as a cartel member, if you come up here illegally, you're constantly subject to scrutiny from the government. You can never be arrested. You can never be questioned because you'll be deported. You put yourself in an incredibly tenuous position if you're interested in engaging in criminality. It's just not a good method. But conservatives say this to justify kids being separated from parents. They say this. They say, oh, well, we don't know if they're actually their kids. We don't actually know if they're related. They're probably just some crazy drug cartel member. Let's separate the kids. No evidence. So we shouldn't do that. If a family comes up here with a kid with them, that family has taken a massive risk, and the likelihood of this family bolting is pretty goddamn low. Children are a huge liability. Like a massive liability. We're not talking about like criminal, like a single guy with like a criminal background who can slip out from under the law. We're talking about a family. A family with no connections, no ties here, may not even speak the language. You really think that they're going to break, like, court date for their potential asylum or immigration status to, like, flee, to be manhunted? It just doesn't happen that often. The evidence suggests that the best way for us to deal with immigration right now is to invest resources not in the detention of immigrants, not in a carceral system, not in locking them up, not in doing whatever the fuck ICE has been doing to them for decades, okay? That's not the solution. The solution is to have them in, check them. You have to keep track of people coming into the country, promise a court date, and have a system of sponsors and government agents whose job it is to make sure that the people who come into this country have a fair shot at engaging fairly with its legal system. Does that make sense? Biden's failure is not these camps. Biden's failure will be when he doesn't abolish ICE. He will not. And that will be his failure. Everything is downstream of that. Because the reopening of these camps is an inevitable consequence of a preservation of the system that exists right now. And nothing but bold, revolutionary change of our immigration system can even come close to fixing it. I don't think he's going to abolish ICE. I know he's not going to abolish the DHS. How based would that be? Jesus. He's doing what seems like, within a terrible system, the reasonable option. But the best option is to act outside of that system. If by some miracle he does abolish ICE, you have to wear his merch on stream for a week. Let me be clear. If Biden abolishes ICE, I will spend a month singing the guy's praises. I'm not kidding. If he abolishes ICE, do you have any idea? Now, he's not going to do it, but do you have any idea how unbelievable that would be? Yeah, I will personally suck his old man dick, okay? 100%. Absolutely. He's not going to do it, but I would. Yeah, don't get too hyped about this. It's not going to happen. The point that I'm making is that that's the change that I want to see. We need a fundamental rewriting of the system. Not just, by the way, because we are literally breaking the Geneva Convention and committing human rights abuses and sexually abusing minors and forced hysterectomies and holding people up and denying them appropriate due process for immigration and asylum status, and not all that stuff either, but also economically. Our system right now is economically untenable. Do you have any idea how expensive prisons are? How expensive detention centers are? The thousands and thousands of people who we pay, whose job it is to spend taxpayer dollars watching children freeze under Mylar blankets? There's no benefit to this. Well, nobody's benefiting from this. A decentralized system of caretakers and sponsors would be cheaper, and it would be more effective, and it would be more humane. That is what we need to do. Does that make sense? We just went over a lot of stuff, and I tried my best to do my reading before all this, but I'm pretty sure that everything that I said is 100% accurate. But I'm going to look more into it, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about proposed solutions in the future, because there's so much information on this. The thing we really need to do is we need to look outside of America. America is dumb. There are other countries that have long contiguous borders with neighboring states that have poor socioeconomic circumstances. I'd be interested in learning more about how other countries handle that influx of immigrants, you know? That's what I'm interested in seeing. We can learn if there's a positive example we can get from somewhere else. Can you do a segment dedicated to drug war sometime? Oh, that's a solution, by the way. Hey, you want to really fix the solution? You want to really implement the solution? You want to really, you know? Here's what we should really do. End the drug war, okay? We end the drug war, we defund the cartels, Mexico stabilizes, and we stop getting so many fucking immigrants from Mexico, okay? I don't want to take in a bajillion Mexican immigrants a year because they have to flee their shitty country. I want the Mexican immigrants who come up here to do so because they like our hamburgers, but otherwise are completely free to stay in Mexico because it's not a cartel-run shithole. Sorry, I'm not trying to, like, shit-talk all of Mexico, but they really do have some, like, criminal issues with the cartels. Oh, thank you, Aina, for the panini. I really appreciate that. I can't believe people in chat unironically think we should immediately dissolve our borders. Yeah, that'd be like Biden just like, yeah, we abolish capitalism. And, like, people are like, woo, based, but then society claps immediately. Private ownership is now illegal. Go for it. Like, yeah, okay, Godspeed. The president cannot abolish ICE or the DHS. Yeah, of course. Wait, I'm sorry. Biden himself can't abolish these systems via executive order. Sorry. I was unclear with my language there. I meant that if he promoted their abolition and succeeded in getting the Democrats in Congress to do so. You know? So is ICE the issue, or is how ICE operates the issue? We don't need ICE. We do not need ICE, period. We don't. We don't need ICE. We just don't. I just don't think they do anything good for the country that other institutions couldn't do better and cheaper. It's not like we had it forever, you know. Immigrants came to this country before 9/11, before the fucking Homeland Security Act. When was ICE even started? Like 2003, right? I think so. 2002, 2003? 2003, yeah. I mean, we had 3 years of the Bush administration had already passed by then. We already had immigrants coming in from Mexico. We didn't need ICE. That wasn't... didn't fix the problem.